In this video, we're looking at the Carbonite Ultra 60's reference and I/O processor assignment menus. So here we're going to jump in and we're going to break down what each of the options and the settings do in these menus. So to get to the same place we're at, you're going to hit the navigation menu button, you're going to head to configuration, and you're going to come to the reference sub-tab, and first we're going to set up the reference section. So under the reference section, the first thing you've got is the video mode. This is the processing format that the switcher is operating in. Any input format converter is going to correct that video to this format, and any output format corrector or format converter is going to take this format and convert it to whatever you define, which we will cover in a separate video. Note you'll see that the video modes here go from 720p 50 up to 1080p 60. That's because for UHD video formats, you have to change the switcher mode into a UHD mode to have access to the UHD formats. To know how to do that, we have a separate video that covers the switcher modes. Please see that video, switch to a UHD, and you will see all of your UHD and UHD frame rates here. Next up is your dynamic range. So even in HD modes, you absolutely can choose to run in a high dynamic range or standard dynamic range. When you're operating in high dynamic range, you can choose the system to process with HLG, PQ, or S-Log3. Again, all this is doing is setting what the system is set to and how it interprets video. So if we go and we turn on an HDR converter, it is going to convert from whatever we tell it the native format is of that input to the switcher operating format. So that's what's most important about this page, is if I want to operate in HLG, I want to set this as HLG, so then it also understands when loading stills and media items what color space it has to interpret those as. Next up is your color gamut. It's absolutely possible to run high dynamic range and use a 709 color gamut. However, most of the time, even in 1080p, you will find that they are now using BT 2020 color space, even with HLG or PQ or S-Log3. It's not just limited to HD versus UHD. So again, best point of advice on this one is going to be whatever the most sources you have are operating in. If you are using all S-Log3 cameras from Sony, best to run the system in S-Log3 and then apply converters to the things that can only operate in HLG. And then on the output side, same thing. If you need to distribute to PQ, it's still best that you operate in S-Log and then set an output conversion from S-Log to PQ. Under your reference source, you have the ability to set the switcher to track its internal reference or set to an external reference. So here we're linked up with an external sync generator, which is giving us tri-level sync, and so we want to reference to that, and the rest of the items in the system, like our video servers and graphics engines and cameras, are all taking in that reference. However, if you were using a flight pack and you didn't have room, say, for an extra signal generator for reference, you could always use the production switcher as your reference generator. Set it to internal. You'd be able to turn on frame syncs for sources that can't take reference anyway, but you also have a reference output which is independent. So you can set this to output blackburst or tri-level sync, either 720p or 1080i reference tri-level sync. So it depends on what the devices want. Sometimes for 1080p 59, devices will want 720p 59 as the tri-level sync, or they'll just take blackburst. If you're operating in a PAL frame rate, so a 25 hertz frame rate, you're actually going to find that instead of NTSC there, we're going to say PAL. So that's just the difference between what the menu will say based on what your frame rate is. If you set it up to output, you're also going to have full configuration of the HV and F settings, so field settings. Or In a progressive format, you're going to have just the H and V, so the horizontal or the vertical offsets, so you can control and swing that reference output. And yes, you can use this in conjunction with that external reference. The example we give here, I may be running Blackburst to all of my facility equipment, but I have a few cameras that for whatever reason will not accept Blackburst or Tri-Level Sync 1080i and operate in 1080p 60. So for that, or 1080p 5994. So for that, we could be using the external reference to lock the switcher, and now we're going to swing the cameras with a 720p reference coming off the reference output of the switcher. So very cool little tool. It's there. Use it when needed. Moving on to our input proc menu. Now with the Ultra 60, this menu is only visible when you don't have a license for every single input and output. That means in UHD mode, where we can only get to a maximum of 40 total frame sync and format converters that can be applied in groups to the outputs and the inputs, well, you'll see that as well. However, here we've intentionally left ourselves only licensed with 2 packs of licenses so that at the top we can see how many licenses we have and how many are currently assigned. Now if you're trying to understand the I/O group help, click on this button and it'll pop up a drawing of how the switcher groups are formulated. So I/O group 1 is the 12 inputs and 4 outputs that you find on the base card, so the bottommost card. Slot 2 is the middle slot, and group 1 is the left side, and group 2 is the right side. So group 1 being inputs 13 through 24, and I/O group 2 being inputs 25 through 36. Now in HD, every single input and output can have a frame sync format converter assigned to it, as we mentioned. So the I/O group is not as important here. However, when you move to UHD, these I/O group numbers reduce to only 8 selectable. And so when you look at this, you'll see that you are selecting for each input processor license which input it's going to be assigned to. So sure, below it's in a nice sequential order, but you could imagine if I only have 8 proc slots in UHD, I can pick anything I need to any slot. So that's now assigning these inputs to utilizing a processor in that order. So it's not numerical order, it's slot order and assignments. So we'll go ahead and remove those because we have those that have Genlock applied to them. So the purpose of this menu is just where you're assigning and where you're applying these input processors. So that's your frame sync format converter as well as your color corrector and proc amp. So if I do need a color corrector and proc amp on one of those other inputs, but I don't need a frame sync, I still assign this processor because I have enough to do all of them. On the output proc front, it's the same thing. You have these I/O processors that can do a frame sync, a format converter, a color corrector, and a proc amp. And when I want to use any of those resources, I have to enable it because I have fewer licenses than I have physical I/O. Well, I would if I had a third input card. In this case, we only see 2 input cards. So under the I/O, you'll notice we don't actually have this installed, but if we did, that's the main reason why I've only got 12 licenses, but I would have had 20 outputs. So again, we come down here, we pick our output, and we can assign those outputs, and what's currently on them is viewed. So these ones have direct outputs currently. And if I needed to format convert those, I could. The second group, you'll notice, is where we're putting out our video processor multi-viewers. In some cases, we're doubling them up. Or here, for example, I might have an aux bus which I'm going to feed to an on-set monitor, and I want to be able to color correct that monitor remotely. So I need to make sure that I assign a color corrector proc amp or an I/O processor to that output. Then it will be available for me to control under the proc amp menu. Questions? Requests? Suggestions? If you have any of those, please send them to switchers@rossvideo.com, and we'll try to get to them in either an email or a video. As always, thanks for watching. Have a great day.